Amen. It's great to be with you again. Cisco Walker here, an evangelist here in the International District. It's a real pleasure to have Pastor Alonzo here with me tonight. And we're continuing our study of A Clockwork Orange. We're looking at the novel itself. We're looking at some of Kubrick's interpretation of Anthony Burgess's Clockwork Orange. And tonight we're going to examine it through the lens of betrayal, Christ-like figures, and a hero archetype, or an anti-hero archetype, depending on how you see it.
Yep.
So we're coming at you tonight from 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 23. And it says, Jesus speaking, Paul speaking, "For I received from the Lord that which I also delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus on the same night in which he was betrayed took bread." And so we're going to be looking tonight at particularly at the character Alex DeLarge and how betrayal plays such a key role in part one of the three parts of the novella. And I wanted to ask you tonight, you know, a lot of people are going to look at this, or they have been looking at this, and they say, well, I'm a Christian, and I pay my tithes, and I've been to seminary school, and I have an education, I study theology, I'm baptized, filled with the Holy Ghost, speak in tongues, credentialed minister, the list can go on and on and on. And so, like, what can I, as Joe B. Christian, learn from a book that talks about sadistic youth, murdering, killing, robbing, pillaging, the power of the state? Convince me as a Christian, like, why should I read a book? Because most Christians are going to look at a story like this, they're going to see it as nothing but filth, they're going to see it as nothing but rubbish, they're going to see it as nothing but satanic, they're going to see it as nothing but worldly, and they're not even going to even attempt to touch a book, but which in secular circles is one of the greatest books written to describe a dystopian society. But Joe B. Christian is going to come up with all those cliches why he shouldn't read it. But in your humble opinion, like, why should a Christian read A Clockwork Orange, or should he read it at all?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And, you know, the answer to it, and there's folks that may not like this answer, but you're already reading that. The Bible is full of that. The Bible is full of totalitarian governments, dystopian settings of murder and rape and pillaging. The Bible is a book full of betrayal. It's full of, in its own way, things that are profane and vulgar. And when I say profane and vulgar, I don't mean they're full of bad words in the sense that, you know, people are like, oh, that's a four-letter word or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But vulgar and profane both mean ordinary. They mean nothing special. So I think a person can gain a lot from reading the Bible, and I think a person can gain a lot from understanding some of what the secular world has. And so, you know, the thing that I lean on often is this great presentation of gospel theology from Paul himself in Acts chapter 17. And so, you know, it says that Paul's wandering around Athens as he's going through this place, you know, Acts 17, that, you know, his spirit within him is provoked. He goes and he sees all these different things, and then he says, you don't know this God that you are worshiping. He says, but let me tell you who he is. And so not only does he tell them who he is, but he references that their own poet has spoken of God. And so Paul is considered by many to be among the most sound theological writers in the entirety of Scripture. When a person looks at Paul, they say, well, Paul wrote 2/3 of the New Testament. They say, well, Paul was, a Pharisee of Pharisees, raised at the feet of Gamaliel, and Paul says that about himself. But it says that he reasoned in the synagogue, verse 17, with the Jews and devout persons, and in the marketplace every day. Now, I wasn't there, right? I can only go off of what the text is showing us, what we draw from Scripture. But in this, what I see is that he found ways to identify commonality with people who weren't engaged in religious activities. Now, in the New Testament, I think that there's a word we call it, evangelism.
Yeah,
that's what it's called.
evangelion.
Evangelism. So he was evangelizing people who weren't at the synagogue. And if I could tell you something that is absolute truth, if you learn to speak the language of the world that you live in, it doesn't have to shake or rattle your faith or your beliefs, but it gives you the ability to communicate with other people.
Yeah, because a lot of people, like, they're gonna, most people, they're gonna want to sit down and talk about A Clockwork Orange. Mm-hmm. They're not gonna want to sit down and talk about Paul or and talk about Jesus and talk about the resurrection, but they will talk about betrayal. Yep. They will talk. You can show like how Alex is a Christ-like figure. It doesn't mean that he is Christ, but it can take you in directions to present the gospel to somebody, and it may not even present itself that way where you wind up talking about Jesus, but at least you're able to have an intelligent conversation about free will, the power of the state, being betrayed by your friends, the power of music. Like, there's so many different layers. There's so many different ways that you can interpret the book, but you can point it back to Christ, because like Alex, he is like a Christ-like figure in some ways, because a Christ-like figure it's a literary technique that draws allusions between the character and the biblical Jesus. Christ-like figures, they perform miracles, healing others, displaying kindness, exhibiting forgiveness, fighting for justice. Alex DeLarge fights for justice when he willfully shoulders the burden of Ludovico. And we haven't gotten that far yet. We'll get to that point, but you have to paint the picture of how bad he is before you can really understand Ludovico. But he is in many ways a Alex DeLarge. He is one who fights for justice, right? Alex is clearly, he's a martyr. Alex is crucified by the state for the sake of others who are disturbed, who are violent, and who are particularly young with the Ludovico technique. And so, like, he may not be, of course, he's not Christ. There is only Christ can be Christ, but like there are similarities. There's a lot of Christ-like figures in literature. Harry Potter is a Christ-like figure. Randall P. McMurphy in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, he's likened unto a Christ-like figure. Neo from The Matrix, he is likened unto a Christ-like figure. And so these help us to, the hero archetype or the anti-hero. The hero, somebody who burdens, who endures pain and suffering for the good or for the sake of other people or for the sake of society. And maybe, just maybe, with the help of the Holy Spirit, we can make these connections.
Yeah, as I've been preparing for this, sometimes it's the terminology that, we kind of get focused on and maybe, just sort of sorting it out, identifying the different elements of it. When I think of Christ-like figure, like, there is a challenge that I have in my own mind to try and get past that language, right? Because it conjures up an image in my mind, and I find myself to a degree at odds with what that phrase connotes. But when I sort of step back and based on the description that you outlined, if we're looking at this in the sense that it is a Christ-like figure, not as in there is one who carries a redemptive act, but rather one who becomes that scapegoat, right? Or the one that all those things fall on, like Randall McMurphy, like
Potter,
Harry Potter, sure. Like, and then when I look at it through that lens, then I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, he totally is. Now, are we saying that he is a Christ-like figure in the sense that he was good, pure, and holy?
No, he's not. No.
Rather, it's that he bears the sin of a society who says, we're going to dump it on someone, it might as well be you.
Yeah, and the society in the state is worse than him.
Yes.
The way that he is treated when he is caught, it is a story of injustice by the state that is pinned upon Alex himself. The treatment he receives from the Millicents, the treatment he receives from his parents, the treatment that he receives from the state, the treatment that he receives from the probation officer. Those problems are still very real. I have experienced them. You have experienced them. People are experiencing them now. And one of the great proclamations of the gospel is justice. And those are some of the wonderful pillars of the gospel, or Christ himself. Is Christ fought for justice, and Christ accomplished a perfect justice. So I understand, we're not saying that he's the Messiah. We're not saying that he's sovereign or he's a divine figure, but within the pages of the novella, you will find deliverance, you will find redemption, you will find penance, you will find almost states of purgatory, you will find all those things if you're willing to get outside of your pure flicks, like snow globe Christianity. I think too many Christians, good Christians, they're just afraid of literature like this because they don't understand it, they don't want to think about those things, and we've isolated, there's a majority of people and pastors, they have isolated themselves from the world, they have incubated themselves from the world. They're not doing what Paul did. They're not talking to people in the marketplace. They're not being invited to Mars Hill. They're not being invited to places to give lectures and speak, because it's us against them, and we want to stay in these comfortable little places, and we're not really, frankly, interested in the outside world. We don't find hope in it. We don't find beauty in it. It's something that's evil, and we want to stay away from it. And deep down in our darkened heart, I wonder if we would want to just burn it down and get rid of it totally.
Yeah, I think we do, and I think part of that is the unfortunate trend in Christianity. This is probably a discussion for another day, but we read in the Bible, the 7 nations that came against Joshua, or Joshua came against the 7 nations. Really depends on whether you're looking at it from the nations or from Joshua's perspective. And we see that there was what we could term a religious / cultural war. And so Christianity, for whatever reason, has always had a tendency to return to legalism as a root. And so legalism and Christianity do not mix. That is mixed grace, and that will always make you sick. And so because we're so prone to mixing law and grace, we find ourselves so eager to engage in a culture war that we throw out things like this because we're at war with the culture. But the culture is made of people. We're not at war with people. We're at war with powers and principalities, spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places. We're not at war with Anthony Burgess.
Whatever that means, right? Yeah.
But we're not at war with Anthony Burgess.
No.
And we're not at war with what Anthony Burgess thinks. We're not at war with what Anthony Burgess writes. We're not at war with Anthony Burgess. We're not at war with Stanley Kubrick. But when Christianity gets its dander up, and right now, the world that we live in, from a political, sociological, and religious perspective, we are in the middle of a culture war that ought not exist because we are not supposed to war against culture.
Yeah.
And that's why we throw stuff like this.
Yeah, and for everybody that thinks this is like satanic, and for everybody that's like afraid of this, and for every, like, just to be clear, like Anthony Burgess, like the original title was A Plank in Your Own Eye. You're going to see traces of Christianity in the biblical account all throughout the pages of this literature. But some people, they don't want to see that.
They don't.
And that is so ironic, because they don't want. The plank in your own eye is the hardest thing for an individual to see. So let's look at Alex is a leader, right? He is a leader. Christ was a leader. Of course, Christ was one of the greatest leaders who arguably ever walked the earth. But Alex is a leader as well. Alex leads his droogs, right, on crime-filled escapades, which include rape, ultraviolence, theft, robbery, damaging private property, and damaging public property. It's interesting how you said the Bible is full of rape. The Bible is full of, quote, ultraviolence, theft, robbery, damaging property, genocide, all kinds of things like that. Why is it so easy for us to just forget that and think that the gospel is just this nice, cloudy, cushiony, goldeny fairy tale? Because it is full of those things. It's full of awful atrocities. But in the midst of those atrocities and in the midst of violence and suffering and despair, there was one who was a leader, who was Christ, who bore the brunt of sin and broke the back of sin.
That's right.
But the Bible is full of stories like that. So we don't have a problem with the Bible being full of those stories, but we have a problem with this being full of those stories. And a lot of people, a lot of Christians, if they had it this way, they'd start a fire and they would burn this book, but they won't burn this book.
Right. When I was putting together a series on leadership that I've been ministering on Friday nights, I picked some folks from the Old Testament, folks from the New Testament, that had specific moral flaws, right? They had specific moral failures, and God was still able to use them. Well, one of the folks that I picked was David. And, David, we sort of gloss over things. We're like, he got a woman pregnant and had her husband killed. Well, if you look at the text, it's not as romantic as people want to. It says she was bathing on the roof. Now, I've heard lots of people. It's
voyeurism.
I've heard lots of people make it sound like she was wanting the king to see her.
Yeah.
Sometimes bathing on your roof may be the most private place that you have.
Well, they did that back then.
Of course they did.
Yeah.
So he's there looking, and then he says he literally sends his goons to go get her.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And to go get her is to kidnap her, and then brings her to him. And you can't really gloss over this part. It's not consensual.
Yeah.
He rapes her.
Yeah.
But we don't want to talk about that, because this is David, a man after God's own heart.
Yeah.
And so we make excuses for bad behavior today when it applies to a Christian or when it applies to someone we support. But it's something that we don't understand. We vilify it because we're terrified of it. Because we're terrified of it, we turn it into this thing that is anathema. It is like the most unpleasant thing in all of Christendom.
I think that's why a lot of people don't want to read the Old Testament. I think that's why a lot of people want to just dismiss everything in the Old Testament. And I think that, and that's been a problem throughout church history for over 1,000 years. We don't need the Old Testament. We don't need those stories. We just have, that's law, and we don't have law. We're not under law anymore, because all we need is the New Testament. But you have to have both of them. And the reason that you look at both of them is not to call out your neighbor or whoever you think is in sin in your church. Like, you think he's David, but you're David.
Right.
Right. What do you say? You think that Haman, you think that you're Mordecai, but you're actually Haman. Bro. You're Saul. You're doing these dastard. You're Nabal, the fool. Right. With David and his many wives and things like that, and all these odd peculiar little stories, but we can learn like so much from those stories, and we can learn so much from looking at dystopian stories like 1984, like George Orwell, like Clockwork Orange, like Dostoevsky. Like there's so many good pieces of literature that are out there, but I think we have to come to a place where we're not so afraid of them anymore. Alex is even compared to the Son of God, and P, or which is his mother because of the vernacular. Alex is compared to the Son of God, and P, the Virgin Mary. And this is a direct quote from the book. It says, "And Mom gave me a tired little smack to thee, fruit of my womb, my only son," sort of. There's similarities with Christ. Alex is an only son. Jesus was an only son. Alex was young. Jesus was young. Alex suffered tremendously. Jesus suffered tremendously and died as a young man. Now, Alex did awful and terrible things. That's the difference. That's why he's not Christ. But there are interesting similarities, because Alex shoulders a heavy burden for others, right? Alex is shouldering the burden of redemption or self-proclaimed deliverance for the sake of all the violent juveniles that involve in the story, because he agrees to the Ludovico technique. He agrees to the treatment at the chaplain warns him, don't do this. Don't go down this road, because if you do, you will violate your free will, which is your God-given right and ability. I have free will to read this book. I have free will to read any book I want. I have free will to say anything I want, watch anything I want. But because Christ is in me, I realize that all things are not beneficial for me, and therefore I do not do them. But the day that we lose free will, and the day that we start burning books and getting rid of things like books and art and music, is the day that we are headed for trouble.
I think we've been doing that irrespective of political party for quite some time. The Rage Against the Machine song, they don't got to burn the books, they just remove them, right?
Yeah, which is completely ridiculous, because they weren't even on an independent record label. They were in bed with the biggest record label that could ever come down the pike. So like, how can you get up there and pontificate about how you're anti-establishment when you're on a major record label? Like, they could have been on Jello's label. They could have been, they could have, that is just, it's just such hypocrisy.
One might make the argument that if you're going to get your message out to the largest possible audience, then that's...
Yeah, but I don't see it that way.
I wasn't in the room when they said
I'm old school, like punk, anti-establishment. Like, you don't get in bed with the biggest record label.
I don't
and
disagree.
then scream about how you're gonna burn flags and like, come on.
I don't disagree with the statement that he makes, irrespective of their DIY ethic or not. The statement that he makes, they don't got to burn the books, they just remove them. That's what's happening right now. I mean, things are...
because MAGAism is the new religion. MAGAism is the new Christianity, and it sucks.
Yep.
I don't care what anybody thinks. I really don't.
I don't disagree.
Yeah.
I don't disagree. And it really is disturbing.
And like, God's not happy with that either.
No.
God isn't. You give what. Render to Caesar what is Caesar's, and render to God what is God's. Like, you can't mix the two and mesh the two together, right? You can't do that. You're not supposed to do that.
Yeah, one of the things I really appreciate about Church of God, and of course we're both credentialed ministers in Church of God, is one of their doctrinal positions is they believe and support the idea of separation of church and state. And you don't find many religious groups that will make that distinction. But the position, and whether or not you've seen it in the minutes or not, it's in the minutes.
Yeah, I don't read them.
I've read the minutes, and it's in the minutes, and it says that, we believe that church and state are separate. Like, don't get wrapped up in foolish arguments. Preach the gospel. Like, focus on loving people. Do what the Bible says. Don't pick and choose who you can love people, make a difference, leave the politics in
Yeah.
the political sphere,
Mhm.
and I value that. Right, like I struggled with organized religion when I came to Christ, and I struggled with Church of God when I came to Church of God. But when I read that, I was like, maybe I'm kicking at the goats, and maybe I need to like let this marinate in me a little bit. And I really value that they.
Yeah.
Now, do the
Well,
ministers practice
yeah.
that? No, I don't
No,
think they do.
they don't.
But they haven't read the minutes
Yeah.
either.
And if I want to fall asleep, I'll read the minutes.
Well, that's how you go to sleep.
If I want to like be bored to death, like I'll read the minutes. Okay, so Alex's teachings and his lifestyle, like it's radical. It's out of the box.
Yeah.
It's extremely controversial because he does terrible things. And the interesting thing is like, remember that PR Deltoid comes and he says, "What's the matter with you, son?" He said, "What's the matter with you?" He says, you've got a roof over your head.
Yep.
You've got a mom. You've got a dad. And it appears that they love you. He's all, "You've got not too bad of a brain." He says, "What is it? Some kind of devil that crawls inside of you?" And Alex, after P.O. Deltoid leaves the encounter in the apartment, Alex is reading the newspapers, and ironically, he comes across a minister who is writing that it's the devil who is responsible for rape and murder and violence. And Alex, it seems to me within the pages of the novella that Alex is like, good, as long as they think it's the devil. But he's like, I do these things because I like to do them. I do these things because I receive great joy in my sadistic, debauched, depraved behavior. And so he, his teachings and his lifestyle, it is out of the box because like he seems to have a good family. He seems to have a roof over his head. And so like you can have all of the right components, or at least the appearance of the right components, and you can still be a sadist, an awful person, a rotten individual, and you can even wear a collar like that. You can even preach in a pulpit on Sunday mornings like
Absolutely.
that. You can appear to be like that. We've seen that over and over and over, like in true crime, like Bind, Torture, Kill, BTK killer, right? Like he held this prestigious position. Like I think it was it a Lutheran? I can't remember which denomination it was, but people, they're good at fooling you, and Alex fools a lot of them too, because like he has all these things, but he enjoys what he does. Alex enjoys sadistic behavior, and he teaches his droogs, he teaches his goons, his little gang, right, that if they need sexual gratification, simply take it.
Yep.
If they need, quote, pretty Polly, which is money, rob. If they need transportation, steal an auto and take it, right? Those are extremely controversial and out of the box teachings. Now, Christ, obviously much different than Alex. Christ ate with tax collectors and sinners, right? For us, we don't really understand the magnitude of bringing a tax collector into your gang or into your group of disciples. Christ associated with harlots, right? Christ cleansed the lepers. He healed Gentiles. He raised the dead, right? He reached out and touched the casket. It's not really a casket, but the widow of Nan, like he touched a dead person. He touched an unclean person.
Yep.
And like that was radical, and that was out of the box. And even the religious elite of Christ's day said he's possessed, he's a Samaritan, he has a demon.
Yep.
So there are some of those similarities. Christ compelled his followers to like go the extra mile.
Yep.
Right? Like they didn't want to do that. They were under the Roman oppression.
Right.
They didn't want to do that. Alex was
Right.
under the oppression of the totalitarian state.
Yep.
Right? Like his apartments, like that's where they all lived. They all lived in those crummy little apartments, right? His mom and his dad, they had to work jobs mandatory by the state.
Yep.
Right, and so those things, because as I read the thoughts on it, like a Clockwork Orange mixes totalitarian state with a capitalist state.
Yeah.
He blends the two together, and like, is that not a picture of where we are in America now?
Yeah, there's
Not to the extreme, obviously, of the novella, but like we're in the backyard at least, aren't we?
I think we're closer than the backyard, man. Like,
Well, elaborate, because that's interesting.
there is I'm getting this ready to start a master's program, and one of the classes is like compassionate, conscientious capitalism, right? Like how do we live in a world where we can gain profit from things, but not at the expense of usury on another person? And I'm personally fascinated. I can't wait to take that class. But other things like reaching out and touching the leper, like we literally push the leper away. Like we do the opposite of those things as Christians, and by doing the opposite of those things, we are lending support to a different kind of violence, a religious violence that we not only allow, but we promote. We promote a form of injustice. You want this, you want laws this way, go and take them. You want this a certain way, go and make it happen.
Pass executive orders.
Right.
Yeah.
Shove it down people's throats.
Right? Yeah.
And it's exactly right. And so I don't know that we're in the backyard. I think we're in the house. I think we're at the front. I think we're at the street. I think we have the address written on our foreheads, that we're seeing the 21st century version of what Burgess was writing about in the 20th century.
Yeah, because these books are prophetic, right? These books have a prophetic implication, and like these books are very old. Like this one, like Dystopian Clockwork, 84, Brave New World. Like hopefully a time will come like where we can explore like all of these, but like no, they are prophetic, and like they were true then, and they are true now, and they will be true in the present. And so like how does a writer do that? I mean, the men of God that wrote the Bible were inspired, but clearly there are poets and there are musicians and there are authors who are inspired and moved upon by something that we can't explain. And who's to say that God didn't speak through Burgess? Who's to say that God didn't speak through Huxley? You say, well, they weren't upright men, and those men were sinners, and those men were gay, and those men were heathens, and those men did drugs, and those men did dastardly, horrible things. Well, God spoke through a mule. God can speak through an inanimate object. I'm not telling you that these books are canon. This is a stretch, but I'm belaboring. I'm saying all these things to make a point that like something like this book and something like other things like that we're going to be discussing hopefully in the future, they've captivated the attention of millions of people for years and years and years. Therefore, if you have any sense, if you want to learn and grow, like we ought to pay attention to them and re-examine them from time to time.
Totally agree. Yeah, I don't think we're wise to be afraid of this kind of literature. One of the things that came up that I was thinking about as we were talking tonight, while the Bible has certainly instances where you see murder, rape, killing, theft of things, and utter annihilation of people, genocide, patricide, matricide, infanticide. Like you see all of these things. There is dystopia in the Bible. Yeah, and I think sometimes we gloss over it. So, I'm one of those. I'm not going to say that we don't need the Old Testament, but Jesus preached Gentile inclusion, and I don't see where God says I need to go back and have a foundational understanding of everything that Moses was teaching. I don't see that. But I do see that Christ said, you may have heard, this is what I'm telling you. You heard him correct people saying you got it wrong. You're putting burdens on people that don't belong on them. And so in the Old Testament, there are lots of instances of dystopia. Like you could almost say that everyday life compared to what we have today was dystopian. Like they didn't have razors like we have razors. They didn't have deodorant like we have deodorant. They didn't have toilet paper.
Yeah.
like we have toilet paper. They didn't have sanitary sewer systems. People were peeing and pooping and whatever they were peeing and pooping, and it ended up sometimes right outside on the street. Sometimes it ended up just outside of town. It was a disgusting and fetid place to live in the world in that day. But in AD 70, what we see to a degree described by Jesus as what is yet to come. In AD 70, that society in Jerusalem experienced dystopia. It was the fall of Jerusalem. The temple was razed to the ground. They experienced an utter annihilation of their moral, theological, religious, and political structure.
Yeah, Rome crucified so many people, there wasn't any trees left.
They leveled the city.
Yeah.
The most glorious thing in their lives was the temple.
Yeah.
And it was leveled, razed to the ground. Not one stone, just like he said, not one stone was left standing on another. Jesus points at it, he says, yeah, you see this? He says, I tell you, not one stone will be left standing upon another. And so I think what we do is we struggle with romanticizing the text. Like, we're always inclined towards making things that we read in the Bible fit a shiny, happy perspective.
Glass slipper.
That somehow, we're always Mordecai when we're always Haman, but we refuse to be Haman. We have Disney princess theology.
Or Pure Flicks.
Right? And we just imagine that the whole world was always that way.
No.
And I'm like,
no.
They didn't have toilet paper, bro. Imagine just like, you want to talk about dystopia,
we
bro?
have it pretty good.
We got Scott. I mean, people can buy Scott.
You can squeeze the Charmin.
Tissue. Yeah, you can squeeze the Charmin. We don't have Charmin here at this house, but we got. If I had Charmin, I had.
Well, you don't have Scott. You don't have the other. You don't have the one with a rose on it, like in jail.
No, we don't have. That comes out of Albuquerque.
Yeah, they have the plant here.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
I remember in El Paso they had that. And I'm like, wow, a taste of home.
Yeah. So let's look at this. So Dante, the Italian poet, the author.
Dante Alighieri.
Yeah, Dante, the Italian poet, the author of the Divine Comedy. He felt that betrayal was the worst of all.
Yes, he did.
Sins. And I think he made a very good case for that. Betrayal is a violation of trust. It's a violation of one's confidence. It's a violation of one's love. Now, Alex experiences betrayals on multiple levels. First of all, Alex is betrayed by his beloved droogs, or those in his gang. Alex is betrayed by his probation officer, PR Deltoid. Alex even betrays himself.
That's such a weird dude.
He's betrayed by the Millicent. He's betrayed by his own parents. He's betrayed by the state. And he's betrayed by the writer. Alex, if you really want to see the implications of how does Jesus or how does the gospel fit into the pages of the Clockwork Orange, wait till Alex goes through Ludovico, goes home. He doesn't go home to a loving father. Nope. He doesn't go home to parents. Nope. He doesn't go home to God the Father, who is waiting for his son who was lost and is now found dead, who is alive. He goes home to his family, his parents. They don't want him. Nope. They've already rented his room, and they want him out. To me, that is one of the saddest scenes of that movie, because he goes back, remember, and he's like, well, I'm back. And they were like, well, son, and they're just very, very uncomfortable. And he's like, well, why didn't you tell us that you were coming back? And he goes, well, I wanted it to be like a surprise for you and me.
How did they not read the paper?
Yeah,
how did they not read the paper?
Well, in the movie, they show the clips before the doorbell rings, and then he encounters Joe, right, and then he sees Joe, and he's like, hey, Dad. He's all, who's this guy sitting on the couch munching on ticks of toast? And it's Joe, you know. And so, like, but he experiences betrayal. He's betrayed by Georgie, Pete, and Dim. And Alex is, in order to be betrayed, you have to love someone. In order to be betrayed, you have to trust someone.
Georgie dies.
Yeah, but the fact shows that the complexity the fact that he is betrayed, it shows Alex is a complex person.
Yes.
There's a duality
Yes.
in little Alex. You know,
Yes.
Alex is human. He's not just simply an automation or like a little monster, like, because he's not.
Right.
Right. There are little kids. I don't know if you saw this recently, but there were those two youngsters that shot that man downtown in that white car. There was an altercation that broke out, and I guess the man slapped one of the kids. Well, they followed him. They shot him several times. They took him to the hospital. He was in terrible condition. Well, he just died. So that poor man is dead, and those two little boys will be charged with murder if they can make it stick. At 18 years old, their life is wasted to some degree and thrown away. So these cycles of violence, these cycles of brutality, like, they keep on moving. They keep on perpetuating, right? Without the gospel of Christ, we're doomed. And these things, history will repeat itself. And guess what? History repeats itself even with the gospel of Jesus Christ, because God's will is not always done. God's will is not always done. God wants things to be a certain way, but sometimes it doesn't happen that way. And the failure is not upon God, but the failure is upon men. Men who will not act. Men who are cowards, right? Men who have experienced betrayal and they have not allowed. You know how many people are sitting right now languishing in drugs and alcohol and despair and suicide because of betrayal? I think Dante was right about betrayal being the worst sin there is. I think it's worse than anything.
Yeah, betrayal is a rough one. Betrayal is a rough one.
So, what did you see in PR? Tell us who PR Deltoid is.
So
and how does he fit into betrayal?
I mean, he's like a school counselor. He's like a probation officer. He's like a life coach. Like, he is a whole bunch of different things, and he
is a real bastard.
He is a jerk. He is one of the individuals that, whether you're reading the book or the movie, watching the movie, reading the book, he is one of the individuals that hits Alex in his genitals. And so, there are...
well, in the book, in the film, he's portrayed more as a sexual deviant. He's portrayed more as a pervert.
I mean, he's not portrayed as a pervert in the book.
Yeah, but not to the degree, I think, that he's shown, like the way that Kubrick shows it in the film.
Yeah, and sometimes you'll see that in a movie, the director will often combine several characters into one.
Yeah, right? And you need both. To understand Clockwork, you need both.
It's so complicated, and there are so many undertones. You're absolutely right.
I think
you don't catch all the undertones in the movie, and you don't catch all the undertones in the book. Like, you have to, sometimes you're like, oh, that's what the book was talking about. And then, like, sometimes you read it in the book, and you're like, oh, that makes sense. That's why that happened in the movie. Because they're not word for word, translations of one another. But, Deltoid is a person that challenges Alex's masculinity in that he appears not only at the house, but he appears at the police station. He appears at different points in time on this story of Alex. And, he represents an element of authority, right?
Yeah.
You have the when you use the phrase militants, for the audience, that's police officers, like a beat officer. He appears in a couple different very significant scenes in the movie, and they are almost always at a point where it illustrates that Alex has always been under the thumb of government authority. And so,
and Deltoid doesn't really want what's best for Alex.
Deltoid doesn't care.
He wants to catch him. He salivates to catch him, and he waits to catch him because he knows that eventually he will catch him. And like there are PR Deltoid people now.
Yes.
I experience them. You experience them. He's a corrective advisor, right? A probation officer. He's tired. He's overworked.
Yep.
He knows that Alex is responsible for the rash of crimes that have been committed. Alex confounds him, right? Because his tendencies toward violence and dastardly acts do not share any characteristics with typical explanations of human behavior. In Kubrick's interpretation, the Millicents, they give Deltoid an opportunity to demean and to debase Alex, and Deltoid spits in Alex's face, which is the ultimate sign of contempt.
Yes.
So this is what people miss. This is what people miss, is that the way that the state, the way that Deltoid, the injustice is so awful towards this young kid. Yes, he commits rape. Yes, he leads a band of kids that are horrible little kids.
Yep.
They do awful, brutal, violent things. But you know what? This is why people who read the book, he is an anti-hero, and you find sympathy for Alex. The way the book is written, the way the story is told, your humble narrator, like you begin to sympathize with Alex, and secretly like you're rooting for Alex. Why is it that we can sympathize with Alex, a rapist, a murderer, a horrible little kid, a violent criminal who, after all, we must always remember that he is just a kid? Why is it so easy for us to sympathize with him, but when people come into our churches that have these kind of jackets, these kind of problems, it's like, oh, we get them out.
I think because when we see ourselves in another person, we become more compassionate. I mean, until you see some of yourself. So, Alex, people start out being as horrified by him as any of the people he encounters in the beginning of the story. And as things progress, and as you begin to understand more about Alex and how, whether or not, he's received the kind of love and nurturing at home that he might have, right? We're not really told.
Yeah.
But we sort of draw things together, like his parents are so terrified of what he has become, but he is, to a large degree, what they created.
Yeah.
And so they're afraid of what they created. They don't know what to do with what they've created.
And that's why they want him out. And that's why when he comes home, they've got Joe.
And so I think we get sympathetic toward Alex when we see, wow, I've done terrible things, and like people did things to me, or I had to go through these challenges, and I made my way through, and I had to fight and claw tooth and nail, and those things make the story more humanized,
relatable. Yeah.
When we have someone that comes in and they look like whatever they look like, we are just as we were at the beginning of the story. We're terrified, we're horrified, we're disgusted by it's the other, it's the fear of the other. But unless we take time to get to know that person, we're never going to see any of ourselves in them.
Yeah. I had a PR deltoid as a juvenile.
Sure,
as a juvenile, I was drunk one night. I was picked up, and I was yelling at police and cussing at them and asking them if they wanted to seek death, and I remember that I was so out of control. And I remember they kept grabbing the back of my head, and they kept slamming my face into the table, trying to figure. And so, like, they roughed me up, and they know where to hit you where it won't bruise. And
of course.
I'm not saying I didn't deserve it, but I don't see policemen and firefighters as gilded angels and golden angels like other people. But anyway, so they throw me in the cell. Right, I'm a juvenile, and I remember, like, it was evening time the next day. I didn't go to school that day, and I was really afraid. I was starting, all the alcohol had worn off. I realized to some degree like what I had done. And this little guy, he was a correction officer there in the juvenile hall in Carlsbad, New Mexico, and he opened the door and he came in, and he gave me the 9th degree. He's like, "You're nothing but a effing piece of garbage, and I see kids like you all the time, and you're gonna grow up and you're not gonna amount to anything, and I'm gonna see you again, and the next time I see you, it's gonna be worse, and you're filth, you're trash, you're and you know what?" And I just remember sitting there hearing that, because I wasn't an adult, And from that moment on, it was like, okay. And Alex says that, right? He goes, okay. He goes, if you bastards are on the side of good, he says that I'm glad that I'm on the other side. I'm glad I'm on the other. He says, I'm glad I'm on the other part of the shop, right? And so, like, that's what he's talking about. And from that moment on, I became anti-authority, very rebellious, things that I still struggle with to this day. Because when you do that to kids, when you do that to juveniles, when you break them in half like that, you can change a person forever like that. Or at least in this life. I've had a PR deltoid, and it's terrible. I wasn't a good kid. I wasn't an angel. But I mean, he gave it to me hard. And he gave it to me, really, really terribly. And if he had his way, and if he could have gotten away with it, God only knows what he would have done to me. But I hardened. And I was like, okay, if that's how it's going to be, then I'm going to be the worst that I can be, because I'm going to run into that guy again, or people like that guy again, and I'm going to get them. And that's a terrible disposition, but that's what a PR deltoid has the ability to do.
Yeah,
right?
Totally agree.
It could be happening right now somewhere in a cell. Probably is.
It's happening. It's a big, big world.
Yeah. Betrayal, right? Betrayal, but he's betrayed by the state, by the system, right? He goes in, he's done awful things, but they abuse him, they hit him, they beat him up, they throw him in the prison, right? They throw him in a cell. He's almost sexually assaulted by 2 other men in the cell. So like, we learn things from looking at this. And I think what's interesting is that Alex betrays himself. And that is, for me, one of the most difficult things of betrayal, right? Because, like, he rolls over on his friends immediately. He's like, get them. They're the ones.
That did it.
Pete
They did it. Get
George, Dim, go find them. They're the ones, right? And it's bad when Dim betrays him, right? I love the way that he's so cruel to Dim, with hoo, how Dim is a dumb, clownish laugh. Well, what is your favorite part? Is it the Rooker in the Rot when the bourgeoisie woman is singing opera, or is it the Cain and the Yarbles? Which one do you like?
It's the opera scene.
The Cain and the Yarbles?
No, it's the
punch?
Yep, it's the punch.
Yeah, because that's what starts the betrayal.
That's
right?
what starts the betrayal.
And there's another interesting parallel with the gospel accounts, is because one of the reasons they imply that they're always fighting for who's going to be the alpha male, right? And Georgie's pursuit of money and lucre is strong.
Yes.
And so it's almost implied that, like, Alex is undermined because of Georgie's greed.
Yeah.
So Georgie can be almost a quasi, like, Iscariot type of person to betray
and he's the
him.
one who dies, right?
Yeah.
Now,
how does he die?
I don't remember. It's in a robbery.
Yeah.
I don't think he gets shot.
But it's later. It's part 2 and part 3.
It is. It's after Alex goes into custody. That I should know. I literally reread the book.
And so let's talk, before we close. Let's talk about self-betrayal, because a lot of people, especially with addiction, right? They're like, my father was a heroin addict, so I drew a line, metaphorically, right? This is figuratively. My father was a heroin addict. So I'll smoke pot, I'll drink, I'll do coke, I'll do meth, but the one thing I won't do is heroin. And a person may be able to hold that line for a lifetime.
Sure.
But then a day comes where he crosses that line and you betray yourself.
Addiction is
Self-betrayal.
defined by what's not okay today becomes negotiable tomorrow.
Peter experienced self-betrayal.
Sure.
Without drugs, without wine,
Yep.
without anything.
He was a wine bibber.
And it almost destroyed him.
Yeah.
Right? Christ had to come. Christ came back for several times, I think, to encourage Peter, to help Peter. And he warned him. He says, the cock is going to crow 3 times. Imagine if that didn't happen. Would he have just gone off, just completely deceived and completely oblivious? would he have never come back? We don't know, right? But self-betrayal, a lot of people struggle when you betray yourself. You know, I remember trying to stop drinking when I was a young man, and my father always encouraged me to stop. But he said, but he also, because he's wise too, you know, my biological father, he's been through hell with alcohol, you know, delirium tremens, like
that impacted his life.
Yeah, all kinds of, you know, watched his brother, you know, his father, you know, just terrible things, unimaginable things, really. But I remember, and then he had to watch his own son, you know, like completely go down the toilet. So I can't imagine what he must have went through. But I remember when I was trying to stop drinking, and he would tell me, he said, don't quit until you're really ready. I was like, what are you talking about? He says, because if you're not really ready and you quit and you go back and you get drunk again, he's like, you may never recover from it ever again. And I just remember being a kid and like, I didn't really know what that meant. But he's right. Self-betrayal is very, very difficult. So as we close this thing up, what are your thoughts on Alex DeLarge, Betrayal, and a Christ-like figure?
Yeah, you know, like
I know that you've told me before that it was a stretch for you to see him as a Christ-like figure, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk with you about it, because you know, you're not just going to be like, oh yeah, well, I agree with everything. No, you know, because you're intelligent and you're not afraid to go against the current, because the majority of the current in literary analysis, they do see him in some ways as a Christ-like figure, but you struggled with that.
Yeah, I struggled because of like what the word Christ means, right? The anointed one. He is not anointed, but when I looked at it through the lens of, you know, he is victimized, brutalized, put in positions, in untenable positions by people in power. When I started looking at it through that lens, it was a whole lot less difficult to rationalize, because Christ, not necessarily of his own accord, right, was put into perilous positions. The difference between the two is one did the wrong things and exposed themselves.
Yeah.
The other was doing the right things, and by doing the right things exposed themselves. But in both cases, they were treated unjustly by a system whose sole purpose should have been to promote, protect truth and justice. And in Alex's case, the system failed Alex. Like the parental system, society as a whole, like they were out doing whatever they were doing in the ways that they were doing. It wasn't healthy. But he was betrayed by the system. And then one of the ultimate betrayals is, you know, of course, the book and the movie differ. Billy Bob was with Dim in the book when they, you know, drug him out to the field and you know,
and the
left him for dead.
Yeah, when the Millicents are they're just thugs with badges.
Right. In the book, it's Billy Bob who was the leader of the rival gang.
Billy Boy, stinking Billy Boy.
Billy Boy, I don't know why I said Billy Bob. It was Billy Boy and Dim, and in the book, it's Pete and Dim.
Yeah.
So, you know, a little bit of difference. But, you know, he's betrayed by his friends beyond just having suffered by going to jail and Ludvico and all the other stuff. It is like further injustice and indignity after he's already down. He's already been whipped, and then he gets crucified.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So like that looking at it through that lens, like I understand that it's not a messianic comparison, but rather a victimization by the system comparison, and I can get behind the victimization by the system comparison. I can get behind that.
All right, amen. Tonight we've been talking about A Clockwork Orange, We've been talking about betrayal, Christ-like figures, and the hero archetype. Be sure and leave a comment. We'd love to read them and engage in conversation with you about it. We're going to continue on. Like us, give us your feedback, and we appreciate you tuning in and watching. God bless you, and good night.
Good night.